My mother ignored me my whole life for my half-brother, but when my dad died and left me an apartment, she forged my signature and sold it for $180,000 to pay for her favorite son's college. So I sued her, and now she's in prison for 3 years. And what I did next destroyed her marriage. I'm 29 years old. I work as a project manager at a consulting firm, and I still can't believe that my own mother is in prison for stealing from me. I mean, she literally forged my signature and sold an apartment that was mine. And when I say mine, I mean legally mine, with papers and everything. The thing is, this story doesn't start there. It starts way earlier. When I was like 8 years old and my parents got divorced. I don't remember much from that time. Honestly, just that one day my dad Peter didn't live with us anymore and I stayed with my mom Donna. And at that moment I thought things would be hard but that we'd be okay. You know? Just the two of us. But turns out my mom wasn't exactly the type of person who prioritizes her daughter when there are other more interesting options on the table. About 2 years passed after the divorce, and my mom met Frank somewhere, I think at a hardware store or something, because he's a contractor, and they fell in love super fast. Frank seemed like a good guy, the type who fixes things around the house and makes kind of bad jokes. He was like 38 years old at the time, and honestly, I thought maybe things would get better because my mom would be happier. But then they had Alexander, my half-brother, and that's when everything really changed. My mom was 37 when Alexander was born, and it was like I just stopped existing to her. It's not that she was mean to me in an obvious way. She didn't hit me or anything like that, but it was like I was invisible. You know what I mean? Everything was Alexander this, Alexander that, and I was there like, hello. I also exist. I also need things. I remember once on my 12th or 13th birthday. I don't remember exactly. She completely forgot, and when I reminded her, she said, "Oh, Rebecca, sorry, it's just that Alexander has been sick and I haven't had time to think about anything else." And I just stood there thinking, okay, I guess this is my place now in this family. Things continued like that for years. Me basically raising myself while my mom and Frank focused on Alexander. And look, I don't blame my brother. He was just a kid and it wasn't his fault. But the feeling of not mattering to your own mother is something that eats at you from the inside in a way I can't even explain. I kept seeing my dad on weekends when I could. He lived in an apartment not too far away and always tried to make up for my mom's lack of attention. He'd take me places. We'd talk about everything. He really listened to me. You know. My dad worked in finance. He was like 48 years old back then. And he always told me to study. To prepare myself to have my own life and not depend on anyone. And I listened to him because he was literally the only person who seemed to care about my future. Then we get to the moment that changed everything. I was 17 years old and I was at my mom's house on a Saturday afternoon. Alexander was at a birthday party or something. Frank had gone out to buy materials for a job, and I was in my room doing homework when I heard weird noises coming from my mom's bedroom. At first I thought maybe something had fallen or I don't know, but then I heard voices, and one of those voices definitely wasn't Frank's. I froze. Like, what do I do? Do I go downstairs and pretend I didn't hear anything? Do I go up and confront the situation? And I decided, I don't know why, to go up. I opened her bedroom door without knocking, something I never did. And there was my mom, Donna, at 52 years old, in bed with a guy I had never seen in my life. They saw me, I saw them, and there were like 3 seconds of absolute silence where nobody knew what to do. The guy got up super fast trying to put his pants on. My mom yelled at me to get out of there, and I just closed the door and went down the stairs feeling like I was going to throw up. That night, I didn't sleep at all, literally nothing. I stayed awake thinking about what to do with this information. Did I tell Frank? Did I confront my mom? Did I pretend nothing happened? The next day, my mom acted like nothing had happened, like absolute normalcy, serving breakfast and asking Alexander about his day and all that. And when we were finally alone, she told me, "What you saw is none of your business. You're not going to tell anyone. And if you do, you're going to destroy this family." And I stood there thinking, what family? The family where I don't matter? The family where they constantly ignore me? That family? But I didn't say anything at that moment. I just nodded and went to my room. About 2 months passed where I couldn't even look at my mom without feeling disgusted. And finally, everything exploded one night when we were having dinner. Alexander was talking about college. He was like 9 years old at the time, so this was years in the future, but they were already planning. And my mom and Frank were talking about how they were going to save for his education and all these things. And I, without thinking, said, "And what about my college?" And my mom looked at me like I had said the most ridiculous thing in the world and said, "Well, Rebecca, you have your father for that. We need to focus on Alexander." And something in me broke. Like, after years of being ignored and making myself invisible, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. I got up from the table and said, "You know what? I'm going to live with my dad." And my mom laughed, literally laughed, and said, "Okay, Rebecca, do whatever you want. You've always been so dramatic." Frank didn't even say anything, just kept eating like this conversation wasn't happening. I called my dad that same night and told him everything. Well, not everything. I didn't tell him about the cheating, because I didn't want to get into that drama. But I told him I couldn't be at my mom's house anymore, that I felt ignored and unwanted, and he, without hesitation, said I should come live with him. I packed my things the next day, which weren't many, honestly, and moved to my dad's apartment. My mom didn't even try to stop me. She just said something like, "Well, if that's what you want," and that was it. There were no tears, no begging for me to stay, nothing. And that, somehow, hurt more than anything else. Living with my dad was amazing. I mean, I finally had someone who really cared about me, who asked how my day was, who helped me with homework, who made plans with me for the weekends. I finished high school living with him and started college. I studied business administration because my dad convinced me it was a career with a future, and he was right. During this time, my dad did something that honestly changed my life. He bought me an apartment. Well, technically, he bought the apartment but put it in my name. Or at least, that was the idea. But since I was a minor and there was this whole complicated legal situation with custody and the divorce, the apartment ended up with my mom's name on some papers, but with documents specifying that it was for me. My dad explained to me that when I turned 18 and with his will, everything would be crystal clear that the apartment was mine, and I believed him because he had never lied to me. The apartment wasn't anything fancy. It was a 2-room, in a kind of old building but in a good area, and my dad rented it out to generate additional income for me while I was studying. I kept living with him because the apartment was rented. But knowing I had that property gave me a sense of security I had never had. My dad would tell me, "This is yours, Rebecca. When you finish college and get a good job, you can decide if you sell it, if you move there, whatever. But it's yours, and nobody can take it from you." Then, when I was 23 years old and in my last year of college, my dad started feeling sick. At first we thought it was the flu or something, but after several doctors and tests, it turns out he had cancer, like aggressive cancer that was already advanced. The next few months were a nightmare, watching my dad deteriorate day by day, going from hospital to hospital, treatments that didn't work, and me trying to hold myself together while finishing college and taking care of him. My mom showed up a couple times at the hospital, like super short visits where she acted worried, but I knew it was all for show. And my dad, being the saint he was, received her with kindness even though he knew she had basically abandoned me years ago. My dad died when he was 58 years old. I had just turned 24, and it was the worst day of my life, hands down. The funeral was weird. My mom was there with Frank and Alexander, her crying like she had lost the love of her life when she was the one who asked for the divorce and left him. And I just wanted her to leave, but I couldn't make a scene at my dad's funeral. After the funeral came all the legal stuff with the will, and sure enough, my dad had left everything very clear. The apartment was mine, his savings were mine, everything he had was for me. There were some papers to sign and legal procedures that took like 2 months, but in the end, the apartment was completely in my name, with no one else's names on any paper, just mine. About 3 years passed. I had already graduated, got the job at the consulting firm, was building my life, and barely talked to my mom, like a message at Christmas and birthdays, and that was it. The apartment was still rented, and I used that money to save. I had plans to eventually move there or maybe sell it and buy something bigger. I hadn't decided yet. And then, out of nowhere, my mom calls me. I hadn't talked to her in months, and suddenly she calls me on a Tuesday night, super friendly, asking how I am, how work is going, all these things, and I knew. I knew she wanted something because my mom never called me just to chat. After like 20 minutes of empty conversation, she finally drops the bomb. Turns out, Alexander is about to start college, an expensive private university, and they don't have enough money to pay tuition. She asks me, or rather tells me, that she needs me to lend them money, like a ridiculous amount. Something like the equivalent of 6 months of my salary. I tell her I don't have that money, that even if I wanted to help I can't because I'm saving for my future. And she gets all dramatic, saying I'm selfish, that Alexander is my brother, that family helps each other, all that speech. I tell her, I'm sorry, but I can't. And she hangs up angry. I thought that was the end of it, that my mom would go on with her life and I with mine. But turns out no. About 2 months later, I get a call from the tenant of the apartment, an older man who had been living there for years, super confused, telling me he received an eviction notice because the apartment was sold. I was like, what? That's impossible. The apartment isn't for sale. It must be a mistake. He tells me it's not a mistake, that he has legal documents saying the property changed owners and he has to vacate in 30 days. I hang up the phone and immediately call my lawyer. Well, the lawyer who had helped me with my dad's will stuff. And I explain the situation. The lawyer starts investigating and discovers that indeed the apartment was sold, but not by me. Someone forged my signature on all the sale documents. He tells me we need to act fast, that this is fraud, and asks me if I have any idea who could have done this. And there, like a punch in the stomach, I realize who it was. My mom. My own mother forged my signature and sold my apartment, the apartment my dad gave me, to get money for Alexander's college. I sat in my office trying to process this. Like, can your own mother do something like this to you? How is it possible to reach that level of betrayal? I decide to confront her before doing anything legal, maybe hoping, I don't know, that she'd have some reasonable explanation or would admit her mistake and try to fix it. I go to her house on a Saturday morning. Frank opens the door and looks surprised to see me. He tells me my mom is in the kitchen, and I walk straight in without greeting or anything. My mom is there drinking coffee like nothing. Alexander isn't there, and I ask her directly, "You sold my apartment." It's not a question, it's a statement, and she doesn't even try to deny it. She looks at me and says, "We needed the money for Alexander. You weren't using it anyway. And besides, that apartment was technically mine too, because my name was on the original papers." I explained to her, trying to stay calm even though inside I'm exploding, that those papers were just a formality because I was a minor, that my dad left everything crystal clear in his will, that the apartment was legally mine, and what she did is fraud, it's illegal, she can go to prison for this. And she laughs, literally laughs in my face, and says, "I'm not going to do anything because I'm her daughter, and because at the end of the day, all this is for the family." I tell her I haven't been part of this family for years, that she made it clear to me a long time ago that I didn't matter, and that I'm going to sue her. She gets serious and says, "Don't you dare, Rebecca. Think about Alexander. Think about your brother. This would ruin him." And I just say, "You should have thought about that before stealing from me." And I leave. That same week, my lawyer files the lawsuit for fraud and forgery. The legal process was long and exhausting, like 6 months of hearings, presentation of evidence, handwriting experts who analyzed the signatures, a whole nightmare. During this time, my mom sent me messages saying I was destroying the family, that Alexander wouldn't be able to go to college because of me, that my dad would be disappointed in me, everything to make me feel guilty. But I knew what I was doing was right. I couldn't let her get away with it. The court eventually ruled in my favor. The evidence was too clear, the signatures were obviously forged, and my mom was found guilty of fraud and forgery. The judge was pretty harsh with her during sentencing, saying what she did was especially atrocious, considering it was against her own daughter, and sentenced her to 3 years in prison. I remember that day perfectly. My mom crying in court, her lawyers trying to appeal, and me feeling a weird mix of relief and sadness, because on one hand there was finally justice, but on the other hand, my own mother was going to prison for stealing from me. After the sentencing, I decided to do something I had been considering for months. I went to see Frank, who honestly had been a victim of all this as much as I was. We sat in his living room, the same place where I had dinner so many times as a child, and I told him about that afternoon when I was 17, about what I saw in my mom's bedroom. I even showed him some old photos I had found on my mom's phone during the legal process, where you could clearly see she had that extramarital relationship. Frank was quiet for a long time, processing everything, and finally said, "I always suspected something but never wanted to believe it was true." I told him I was sorry, that I should have told him before, and he just shook his head and said it wasn't my fault, that my mom was responsible for her own actions. Frank filed for divorce like 2 weeks later. I found out through Alexander, who called me super angry, blaming me for destroying his family, saying that because of me, his mom was in prison and his parents were getting divorced. I tried to explain to him that it wasn't my fault, that his mom made her own decisions, but he didn't want to listen. He hung up and we haven't talked since. It's been like 2 years now with that silence. And although it hurts because he's my brother and none of this is his fault, I understand that he's angry, and maybe someday he'll be able to see things differently. And with the court ruling in my favor, I managed to recover the money from the sale of the apartment, plus some damages that the court ordered. I couldn't recover the apartment itself because the new owners were good faith buyers who didn't know the sale was fraudulent. But with the money I recovered plus what I had saved these years, I decided to buy myself a house. Nothing ostentatious, a small house on the outskirts of the city, 2 bedrooms, a small yard, but it's mine, completely mine, and nobody can take it from me. My mom has served 1 year of her sentence so far. She still has 2 more years to go. I haven't gone to visit her once and I don't plan to. Sometimes I get messages from unknown numbers, probably friends of hers or acquaintances, telling me I should forgive her, that she's my mother, that family is important. But the truth is, she stopped being my mother a long time ago, probably when she decided I wasn't as important as her new family. Frank got divorced, and from what I know, he's starting a new life. He moved to another city and is working on big construction projects, and I'm honestly happy. For him. Alexander is in college, not the private one my mom wanted, because obviously they can't afford it, but he's studying at a public one, and from what I understand, he's doing well. And me? I'm still working at the consulting firm. They promoted me to senior manager a few months ago, which is great. I have my house that I'm decorating little by little, and I'm in therapy trying to process this whole situation. I'm not going to lie and say I'm perfectly fine, because I'm not. There are days where I think about everything that happened and I get angry again. There are days where I miss having a real mom even though I never really had one, and there are days where I just feel empty. But there are also good days, where I wake up in my house, drink coffee in my yard, and think, I survived this. I made it through despite everything, and that has to count for something. People ask me if I'll ever forgive my mom, and honestly, I don't know. Maybe yes, maybe no. I don't have the answers yet. What I do know is that I'm not going to let what she did define the rest of my life. I'm not going to carry that anger forever, because that would only hurt me. But I'm also not going to pretend we have a normal relationship or that things can be fixed with a simple apology, because what she did was unforgivable on so many levels. I can't even list them all. Sometimes I think about my dad and how he always tried to protect me, to give me security, to make sure I had something of my own that nobody could take from me. And even though my mom managed to take that apartment from me temporarily, in the end she couldn't take what my dad really gave me, which was the strength to stand up for myself, to not let anyone walk all over me, and to know my worth even when the people who are supposed to love me the most didn't. Nobody can take that from me. Not even her.